Today we'll look at Chapter 2, the application of the CPT system, and just go through a few exercises. As you become more familiar with your code book, it will come a little bit easier. I want to review the main terms, and this information is taken from the index. I'll show you that on the document camera in just a minute. There's 4 primary ways you're going to look up your main terms. One is by the name of the procedure or the service. Another is the organ or the body system or the anatomic site that you're having the procedure on. The condition that precipitates the procedure or something related to it. A synonym, eponym, abbreviation. So there's 4 primary ways you're going to look for something. So if we take a minute and look in the code book, you'll see where I took this from. This is something that will really be second nature very soon. And here you see we're in the index. This is the very first page of the index. It says main terms. And here's those 4 ways that you can look up some terms. Sometimes they stand alone, sometimes they're followed by modifying terms, but you're going to start looking for your code in one of these 4 ways the majority of the time. Okay, let's look at this one. A patient presents with a 1 centimeter carbuncle on the posterior section of the neck. The surgeon performs an incision and drainage. Carbuncle is like an abscess. The ICD-10 code is here, and that is our medical necessity that would justify this procedure. So then you look at those 4 questions. What's the procedure that we're coding? Incision and drainage. What part of the body? The skin of the neck. What's the condition? A carbuncle on the neck. Any synonym, eponym, abbreviation? Not in this case. Not applicable. So if we look in the index under incision and drainage, we find the term carbuncle. It gives us the code 10060, 10061. Then you go to the CPT code book, you look up that code in the integumentary system, and you read it and determine which of these 2 codes from the index would be the right answer to describe this diagnostic statement, and it would be the 10060. If the physician had documented a lot more information that would qualify for a complicated, or if he had removed or not removed, drained multiple of abscesses, then you would use the 10061. Okay? The first one was looking at a procedure and finding the main term under incision and drainage. Now let's look at one that we have to look at our main term a little bit differently. The diagnostic statement is the biliary catheter exchange. What's the procedure? It's a catheter exchange. What body part? A bile duct. The condition? They don't tell us. Synonym, eponym, abbreviation? Not applicable. So the only thing we have to work with, it's the biliary tract or a bile duct, and it's a catheter exchange. So we just start looking for main terms that would help us identify that. I tried exchange first in the index. Wasn't helpful. There's a few modifying terms there, but not the exchange of a biliary catheter. Then I tried bile duct next. Nothing there. Then I tried bile duct catheter. Nothing there. And then bile duct exchange. Nothing there. Okay. It has to be here somewhere. So then I just start reading all the subterms under bile duct, and I get to drainage, and then you can just quickly scan, and after drainage you see the catheter, and then under the catheter you see exchange. So you found it. And that is exactly what it's like to find a code. Not all the time. Sometimes it's very straightforward. Sometimes it isn't. This example isn't that straightforward. But you see how you can work around to get to keep narrowing down your choices until you can just read the text. Let's try another one. Ablation of a polyp in the esophagus. What's our main term? Ablation. If you don't know the meaning of a term, go to your Google search engine, type in ablation followed by a colon, and that will take you to some definitions, and you can read what that means, or if you have a medical dictionary, you can look it up there. But ablation is destruction. The anatomic site we're talking about is the esophagus. The condition, patient has a polyp in the esophagus, and the last bullet point doesn't apply. So now we've got ablation or esophagus or polyp. So under ablation, there were no subterms for polyp or esophagus, but when I went to polyp, I did find esophagus, and under esophagus I found ablation. So I was able to find it using the condition in this case. So when you go to look up that code that's given, that 43229, that code description begins with the word with, meaning that it is tied back to some code description in previous codes before the semicolon. Remember in one of our lectures we talked about how is information up to the semicolon, and all the codes under the code you're looking at uses that same core, if you will, that same description up to the semicolon, and then after the semicolon you see the differentiation between those codes. So you would have to get to 43229 and read previous codes until you got to the core, to the main descriptor, and there's many before this one. Okay, let's do another one. Closed reduction of the fractured neck of the radius with manipulation. So the main term, your procedures, your closed reduction with manipulation, and the reason why that's important when you get to choose your codes, one of the codes will say with manipulation and one will say without manipulation. Organ or anatomic site is the neck of the radius. The condition is a fracture. So those are the three things we know from this diagnostic statement that we can begin to look for a term. So we go to the index. There's no subterm for radius under reduction. So we're going to go to a different main term. Let's say we start with fracture, radius closed treatment, and that takes us to this set of codes. But when we look up that range of codes in the code book, they are for the closed treatment of the radial and ulna fracture. So you've got two broken bones in your forearm. So then we're going to go back to the index and we're going to look for codes that describe just the radius, the neck of the radius, and don't include the ulna. So when we go back to the index and start reading down a little bit further, you get to fracture, radius, head/neck, closed treatment, and there's your code range. And now when we go to that section of the CPT book, we see the codes are just for the radial head or the neck fracture. And we have to choose between without manipulation and with manipulation. Now I want to look at some examples of test questions so that you know the types of questions you're going to see on exams and the types of questions that you might see on a national exam if you're taking the RHIT exam or one of the coding exams in your future. This particular question talks about codes 1120 through 11201, which are removal of skin tags, and is asking what's the correct code for the removal of 16 skin tags. So let's go to the code book and look at that. Okay, so I went to the codes in the code book. This is in the integumentary system. The removal of skin tags has its own section, and the code description for 11200 says up to and including 15 lesions, and our question was 16. And as you see the code description for 11201, each additional 10 lesions or part thereof. So and that means for the removal of 16 skin tags, you're going to have to use code 11200 and code 11201, and that is written with a comma between those. I also want you to notice the little add-on code there. That tells you that that code 11201 would not be used alone. It has to be used along with 11200 in order for it to make sense, because it is each additional 10 lesions or part thereof. Okay? And there's your answer, 11200, comma 11201. Okay, let's look at an example of another test question. Now I'm showing you these to show the types of questions that I can ask on the exam that you won't be surprised. What I'm asking you to do is to go to these codes and read the code descriptions. And by reading them, you should be able to assign codes. So it's not so much this time about looking up a code as it is about being able to read carefully the code descriptions and choose the codes that best describe the procedure that we're doing. Let's look at another one. Reference codes 31360 through 31368 for a laryngectomy. What is the correct code assignment for a laryngectomy with subtotal, supraglottic, and radical neck dissection? So you're going to actually read those code descriptions. So let's start with 31360. And here we are in the code book, and you see 31360, laryngectomy total without radical neck dissection. Then we have a total with radical neck dissection. Then we have 367, a supraglottic without radical neck dissection. 368, subtotal supraglottic with radical neck dissection. So our answer would be 31368. That code description describes exactly what our diagnostic statement there says it does. So 31368 is the correct code assignment for a laryngectomy with subtotal, supraglottic, and radical neck dissection. Okay, let's do another one. Reference codes 49491 through 49525 for inguinal hernia repair. What you want to notice for this particular case, it's an initial inguinal hernia repair. It's incarcerated, and the patient's 47 years old. Those are all things we need to know when we choose this code. So let's go to 49491 in the code book. Code book 49491, repair initial inguinal hernia, preterm infant. Well, we know that's not right. So when we go to the next one, 49492, this incarcerated or strangulated goes with this code for the preterm infant. So we know it's not either of those. So let's move down to this one, 49495. 49495, repair initial inguinal hernia, full-term infant, younger than 6 months or preterm. Okay, we know we're in the wrong neighborhood again. So let's try another one. And this code, 49496, goes with the bottom of the other one. So now we're up to 49500. This is for someone aged 6 months to younger than 5. Okay, that's not right either. Now let's go here, 49505. Repair initial inguinal hernia, 5 years or older, reducible. Okay, well most of that's right? We do have a repair, and the person is older than 5 years old, but the reducible is the problem. This is an incarcerated or a strangulated hernia. So then we go to the code under that one, 49507, and this describes. So this is very close. Repair initial, 5 years or older, incarcerated or strangulated, 49507. You notice that these are all initial. All the codes up to this point are initial inguinal hernias, and this one is a recurrent. So the exercise we are coding was initial. So I'm going to say it's 49507, and here we go. That is the correct answer. So you see that even though we haven't studied these body systems yet, I can still ask you these questions on an exam, because I'm not asking you to find a code. I'm asking you to read the codes that I've given you and be able to determine differences in them and select the one that describes whatever procedure or service that I am giving you to find. Okay, the last thing I want to say is that you can use either the CPT index, which is what I've gone over here, or you can use the code book if you know the different body sections to find a code. And if you cannot find a code, you can certainly ask questions of me in discussion board or by phone or by email. But whenever you contact me, I expect you to tell me what path you tried to find a code. We don't learn to code by having someone else tell us how they found the code. We learn to code by looking for it, by knowing how to use the code book. So whenever you post a question, that has to accompany your question. Okay? If you have any questions, please post them there, and have a good week.